I always think of Kingpin, aka Wilson Fisk, as one of the most paradoxical Marvel villains ever. I mean, this is a guy who has no special superpowers or cosmic enhancements, and yet, as a mere mortal, he is able to challenge the mightiest of superheroes, including Spider-Man. This mob boss speaks like a diplomat and looks all classy, and most versions of Kingpin show him as someone who doesn't really see himself as evil. He might be one of the deadliest street-level villains across the Marvel universe, but he strongly believes that organized crime under his leadership is less harmful than the chaos without him. Of course, this makes his journey all the more fascinating. How does a boy from the slums of New York go on to build a powerful criminal empire to challenge the best of superheroes? In this video, you will find the entire story of Kingpin across multiple versions. I know the popularity of Kingpin has skyrocketed since Vincent D'Onofrio made it iconic, but here you will find all other versions and interesting stories that make the character who he is. The creation, Amazing Spider-Man, 1963. I think the first appearance of Kingpin is largely considered underwhelming by many, but I still consider it to be impactful enough. Now, I know that the version of Kingpin that we are all familiar with today is only a shadow of the first appearance, but the aura is still the same. It all happened way back in 1963 in the pages of The Amazing Spider-Man, issue 50. The story starts off with one of Spider-Man's heroics, where he stops a bunch of robbers, but he later finds out that Aunt May has fallen sick while he was away. Also, there are some instances of him missing out on the regular aspects of life, like spending time with MJ and Gwen or caring for his aunt. The guilt convinces him that the life of a superhero is adversely affecting his personal life, and he thinks of giving up on his Spider-Man duties. He discards his suit and vows to lead a regular life, where he can be a devoted lover and a caregiver for his old aunt. But things take a turn for the worse, as the underworld uses the opportunity to flourish once again. A man named Kingpin, who works from the shadows, wants to take charge of the criminal underworld and make it organized like a business organization, where he will serve as the chairman. The aura of Kingpin is unmistakable, as the other crime lords know they must obey his command. I love the look of Kingpin here, as the artwork makes him appear obese and bald with silkworm-like eyebrows that look somewhat comical. But make no mistake, he is anything but a comic relief here, because his very presence is enough to rattle all the biggies in the criminal underworld. One of them dares to oppose, and he gets the treatment as Kingpin takes him down effortlessly. Kingpin has a powerful obliterator beam in his walking stick, and it is powerful enough to knock out just about anything. He tests out the waters by attempting a few daring robberies, and when he is convinced that Spider-Man is not around any longer, he plans something big. However, after the robbery of a welfare fund, Peter Parker is tempted to go back to his superhero life, and this belief grows stronger after he saves an old security guard who reminds him of Uncle Ben. He gets his suit back, and it's time for a showdown between Spider-Man and Kingpin. First, Kingpin is bothered by a headline in the Daily Bugle, where the publisher Jameson has written a piece about a rumored underworld takeover. He wants to give Jameson a chance to change his stance, but if he doesn't agree, Kingpin is ready to get rid of him and have him replaced. Then he finds out that Spider-Man is still out there, after some members of his organization take a beating. When he gets questioned and challenged by some of his henchmen, Kingpin proves that he doesn't need his special cane to fight. He single-handedly gets into a fight with all those who oppose him, and it is not even a contest. Clearly, he might look bulky and chubby, but he is actually quite powerful and agile. The others are intimidated when they see Kingpin handle the powerful Big Turk, and later, Kingpin gets Jameson kidnapped, only for Spider-Man to follow his trail. This brings about the final encounter, and it is far from one-sided. Spider-Man gets kicked and punched, and finally he is immobilized by a gas from Kingpin's tie pin. Kingpin and his henchmen tie up Jameson and Spider-Man and leave them to drown in a chamber that is gradually filling up with water. Of course, Spider-Man is back to his senses soon enough, and he is able to free them both. When he takes on Kingpin one more time, the fight is intense, and Kingpin reveals that he is actually 450 pounds of solid muscle, and only deceptively chubby. Yes, Spider-Man is able to get the better of him this time, but he is still able to walk away without getting captured. You know what I find the most ironic about the first appearance of Kingpin? It is the fact that this man didn't create a massive stir with his arrival, and his presence was subtle and away from the limelight. It showed that the mob boss functions best with the absence of others, when he can work his plans effectively. Also, the defeat is merely Kingpin taking a step back voluntarily, and not a crushing humiliation. Now, I don't think anyone should compare this debut of Kingpin to the Miller-era Kingpin, because aside from a common name and a familiar body type, there is almost nothing in common. Frank Miller's Daredevil and Born Again, 1981 to 1986. The character is remade. Maybe the most important creative decision around Kingpin was when it was decided to turn him into a memorable enemy for Daredevil. It all started back in 1981 in the pages of Frank Miller's landmark Daredevil run, where number 170 reintroduced Kingpin as the perfect criminal force in Hell's Kitchen after a period of self-imposed exile. I would say the main importance of this feature is how it shifts Kingpin from being just a Spider-Man antagonist to Daredevil's defining opponent. The Kingpin story arc begins as Daredevil uncovers a serious criminal deal worth $5 million, and upon further investigation, he learns that the prize money is for a hit job on Kingpin. Daredevil is initially confused because Kingpin has long retired, and it is revealed that he went off to Japan and bought himself a mansion. Then the next panel shows Kingpin training, and he looks way bulkier than his first appearance. But once again, it is all solid muscle, and he is great at combat as ever, and the training sees him take down multiple opponents. Now, he hates being called Kingpin and goes by his name Wilson Fisk, claiming himself to be an innocent spice dealer. He is married to Vanessa, and he has a very interesting offer from the US Attorney General's office. If he hands over evidence against the entire group of crime lords, he will get his name cleared and $7 million in reward. He sends Vanessa to hire the services of Mr. Murdock to represent his case, but things go south when Vanessa is kidnapped, and the same love that once made Kingpin give up on a life of crime now brings him right back into the fold. It doesn't take long before Kingpin realizes that Daredevil is the one superhero in his way of absolute domination of the underworld. Things take a serious turn in the Daredevil Born Again story arc, where the true ruthless nature of Kingpin is there for you to see. It starts off with Matt Murdock's ex-girlfriend Karen Page, who ended up as a heroin addict after a brief career in acting. She went on to star in pornographic films in Mexico, and even then she was so broke that she sold the information about Matt Murdock being Daredevil for a shot of heroin. Now, you can imagine how useful this information turns out to be when it reaches Kingpin. He goes ahead with an elaborate plan over the next 6 months where he strips Murdock of all that he holds dear, step by step. He uses his influence to freeze the accounts of Matt Murdock through the IRS. He even arranges for a bank foreclosure on his apartment, and a false testimony against him takes away his dignity when he is accused of paying a witness to perjure himself. Daredevil investigates on this matter and realizes that the police lieutenant who testified against him is doing so for medical treatments for his son. Somehow, Karen manages to evade all those sent after her, and she seeks out Matt Murdock in New York. Unfortunately, Mr. Murdock is not the same anymore. All the trauma takes a toll on his mental health, and he suffers from paranoia and becomes increasingly aggressive. Also, he is now homeless and constantly tracked by Kingpin's men who update him with every move that he makes. There is a moment of desperate revenge that takes Murdock right into Kingpin's lair, but it only ends with him badly beaten and bruised. He is strapped to a stolen taxicab, doused in whiskey, and pushed into the East River. Somehow, he manages to gain consciousness and break out of the cab, but he is badly injured. There is a nice little twist when he finds his long-lost mother in the process, and she nurses him back to health. Meanwhile, Ben Urich, a reporter of Daily Bugle, discovers how Murdock has been framed by Kingpin. He plans to kill Foggy Nelson, but Daredevil finds out and also defeats an imposter Daredevil created by Kingpin. His reunion with Paige is an emotional moment where he forgives her for giving away the secret that effectively ruined his life. He moves into an apartment with her and helps her through heroin withdrawal. Kingpin asks Nuke to attack civilians in Hell's Kitchen to draw out Daredevil, and it works because Daredevil appears for the first time since his apartment was destroyed and nearly kills Nuke. The Avengers step in and take custody, and Captain America investigates his background. It turns out that Nuke is from the same project that enhanced Captain America, and when Nuke tries to escape, Daredevil grabs him and gets him to the Daily Bugle to testify about the Kingpin. But it doesn't work because Nuke dies before they can even reach him. On the other hand, Captain America finds out about the involvement of Kingpin from a hitman sent to kill Nuke. This sets off a series of lawsuits, and Kingpin loses his public image as a respectable businessman. The story ends with Kingpin's obsession still intact, as he is even more revenge-hungry now. As for Matt Murdock, he continues living in Hell's Kitchen with Karen and continues his fight for justice in his neighborhood. I am one of those who think that this story is the best narrative featuring the Kingpin and Daredevil, and Miller gained a lot of fans following this stunning creation. I would even say that it is one of the best Marvel stories ever written because the sheer human element in the story is insane. It shows how much a person can stoop down for revenge, and the obsession that Kingpin develops also exposes the corruption in the system, where an innocent can be framed and ruined. For me, the best part is the comeback that really defines a superhero. Matt Murdock is able to redeem himself after being pushed to his limits, and I don't think any other story defines both these characters any better. Kingpin number 1 through 7, 2003. The origin the franchise never told. By the year 2003, we were all familiar with the exploits of Kingpin and what he was capable of, but his origin story still remained a mystery. I often wondered what drove someone to become like the ruthless and dangerous criminal mastermind that we see him as. Well, the answers are here in this comic series by Bruce Jones, and the crime noir tone of the comic series makes it a very interesting read. The story introduces Wilson Fisk as a young man, and Leonard, aka Smokey, is surprised to see him as a large white man in a black bar. He is ridiculed and taunted, but it changes quickly when he stabs someone who jokes about his weight. Together with his strong man Rocco, Wilson Fisk takes down several members of a rival gang, the Saints. Only a man named Leonard is spared because Fisk sees his exceptional fighting ability and takes him in as his new lieutenant. The story shows his skills as he does the smart work alongside the hard work, turning one gang against another and taking out his enemies through clever conspiracies. I love how calm and composed he is, even when faced with life-threatening dangers, and he even has a relationship with the girlfriend of a rival, only to further the chaos. Throughout the course of events, he only grows stronger and commands more respect courtesy of his calculated moves. You can tell that this is not just another hot-headed mob boss, but someone who wants to dominate and has his goals set. He gets shot at, he gets betrayed, but his resolve remains the same. I think one of the most powerful moments of the story stems from the fact that his self-image is clean as ever. He does not see himself as a criminal, but as a man who understands power. Is this one of his best storylines? Well, I don't think so. But at the same time, it does have its charms. Maybe the most eventful thing here is how he handles his relationships, especially with the ones that he chooses to trust. The underrated childhood arc, Daredevil Volume 2, number 15 and number 116. Have you wondered what Kingpin's childhood could have been like to make him such a cold and ruthless mob boss? Well, the answer comes in Daredevil number 15, where we get a quick flashback that gives you a whole different perception of the dreaded villain. His childhood was far from easy as he grew up in extreme poverty. His abusive father was a lowly worker who never made enough money. His mother used to shout at him for the shortcomings, and he grew up with his parents fighting most of the time. His only comfort was his pet mouse and its hamster wheel, and he quickly learned the hardships of fear, isolation, and desperation. He was also bullied by his peers at school, until he learned to fight back. He blinded one of them and instilled a fear about his intimidating stature. Kids soon gave him their lunch money to avoid getting beaten up, and slowly this led to a life of crime. He murdered his first victim at the mere age of 12, and there is even a flashback from his early days in the underworld when 4 members of his gang challenged his position, and he took them out without any trouble. This is a hardened man who has grown from nothing, and I almost end up sympathizing with him for what he had to endure. No wonder he loves money and power and wouldn't give up on either because he had none growing up. Later in number 116, it is shown how his father physically abused his mother and he tried to protect her. One fateful day, he ended up biting his father's ear, and Wilson Fisk changed forever as he remarks he still remembers how his father's blood tasted like cold metal and fear. I know the childhood aspect is often an underrated arena, but for Kingpin, it holds a lot of significance because it literally shaped who he is. Bendis Daredevil, Underboss, and The Fall, 2001 through 2006. In this video, I have already covered the Born Again story arc, and you have seen how desperation drives Kingpin in the hours of crisis, as he becomes obsessed with destroying Daredevil. This time around, it is Kingpin's turn to be the victim, as he falls to some unexpected betrayal. The power cracks from inside, and the man who loves to feel powerful is rendered helpless. So, what happens to Wilson Fisk when the Empire is taken away? Let's find out in this Underboss arc written by Brian Michael Bendis. Before I head into the details of the story, let me quickly introduce you to Sammy Silk, a man who is a small-time crook with ties to an influential mob family. He does a Caesar on Kingpin, and the mob boss is caught off guard as Sammy and his men stab him repeatedly, seemingly killing him. It is a chilling moment, and I find it quite impressive how Sammy pulls off the whole act in style, complete with the Julius Caesar reference. A week ago, there was an attempt on Matt Murdock's life right after he fights a case in court, and it really played with his mind. He immediately immediately suspected Kingpin behind the attack, but when he went to confront him, the latter denied outright. Apparently, an accident had caused Wilson Fisk to go blind, just like Daredevil. But the interaction also shows Sammy Silk in the ranks already. Back in the present, Ben Urich at the Daily Bugle receives news that Kingpin is dead. Well, of course, he's not really dead, and his wife Vanessa is informed about the severe assassination attempt on him that has left him severely wounded. He is secretly kept in the house of his personal physician, Dr. Rogan, and Vanessa is told about how Sammy Silk is the one involved. While Vanessa goes about revenge with Kingpin's trusted man, Dini, the crime lord is forced to go on an exile. Of course, his comeback is fascinating as ever, because he waits his turn with patience. I think the biggest takeaway from this story arc is that you cannot take away the magnitude of Kingpin by taking away his throne, because he is someone who can regain the lost grounds with his trusted few. Spider-Man the Animated Series, 1994 to 1998, the animated version of Kingpin. For many, this is what introduced them to this iconic character, especially those who weren't familiar with the comic book lore. Spider-Man the Animated Series was easily one of the most popular cartoon shows during the time, and Kingpin featured in some key episodes voiced by Roscoe Lee Brown. Don't be mistaken into thinking that you get a watered-down version of the character, because some critics are of the opinion that the character gets new dimensions that even some comic appearances couldn't achieve. I love the choice of casting Roscoe Lee Brown for the role because his voice fits the bill perfectly. I feel like he has the perfectly deep and measured tone with a lot of gravity that is needed for the character, and in my mind, this is exactly how I imagined Kingpin to sound. The first significant story arc that features Kingpin is the Alien costume, which is a 3-part episode in Season 1. The story begins with John Jameson discovering a strange black rock on an asteroid in space. When he removes the rock from the ground, it triggers an earthquake and he is barely able to make it back to his shuttle with the rock. The news reports on Earth suggest that John Jameson and Paul Stephenson are landing at Kennedy Airport, and they are bringing a new isotope with them called Promethium X, which is possibly more powerful than plutonium. Meanwhile, Kingpin is also watching the news and he decides that he wants it. However, the re-entry into Earth's atmosphere goes wrong when the black slime from earlier oozes out of the Promethium X and covers Paul Stephenson. The shuttle is about to crash into New York City, and Alistair Smythe tells Kingpin that he expects it to crash at the George Washington Bridge. This prompts Kingpin to send Rhino to steal the Promethium X for him. It quickly turns into a tussle between Spider-Man and Rhino as the latter tries to get to the shuttle first. But through the whole ruckus, J. Jonah Jameson from Daily Bugle believes that Spider-Man caused the crash and stole something from the shuttle. Eddie Brock supports the claim through some pictures that he took earlier and uses this to get his job back. But Rhino has already stolen the Promethium X and he takes it to Kingpin, followed by Spider-Man on his trail. The story has another twist when Spider-Man is affected by the black slime and gets enhanced spider powers. Meanwhile, Kingpin wants to sell the Promethium X to the buyers, but he needs special control rods made of Lithium-90 to prove its powers. This turns out to be another job for Rhino, and this time, Spider-Man in his new dark avatar nearly kills him. The narrative continues as Spider-Man continues to lose control over himself, becoming increasingly violent. Meanwhile, Kingpin finds buyers for Promethium X, and experiments prove that the entire planet could be destroyed by this powerful tool. On the other hand, Spider-Man seeks out Dr. Kurt Connors, and they discover that the black slimy thing is actually a living organism, an alien symbiote, which bonds with a host to survive. Later, Eddie Brock's lie is caught, but another twist comes in the form of the symbiote taking over Brock's body, dubbing himself Venom. Eventually, Kingpin's plan doesn't work, but the main takeaway from this entire episode is how he is established as the lord of the criminal underworld. He avoids direct confrontation, but does his bidding nonetheless. I really like the episode titled The Insidious Six when it comes to portraying Kingpin. You see, here you find him in his true elements as the undisputed leader. But that's not how it begins, because things start at a disadvantage for him when a crime lord named Silvermane tries to dethrone him as the leader, suggesting that he has lost the respect of the crime cartel. Kingpin is surprised by a sudden challenge, but he breaks free and shows who is boss in no time. In order to convince his subordinates that he is still someone to reckon with, he tells them about his plans to kill Spider-Man. He orchestrates a major prison break aided by a robot and frees the likes of Chameleon, Dr. Octopus, Rhino, Quentin Beck, Shocker, and Mac Gargan. He then flies them away on a helicopter and brings them to him. Kingpin names the group Insidious Six and offers them to work for him to take down Spider-Man. He points out that working alone did no good for them earlier, and this is a chance to get things in order by eliminating their arch-nemesis. Dr. Octopus is hesitant to join Kingpin as a subordinate, but he is convinced by the promise of a state-of-the-art laboratory. Meanwhile, Spider-Man is struggling with his powers, and he finds himself powerless at some crucial moments, which makes him vulnerable. He reads about the 6 criminals escaping, and he wonders why they haven't been up to any new crimes since then. If he only knew that he is the target this time around. When Spider-Man faces the Insidious Six for the first time, he is outmatched and has to rush for cover. Eventually, he is cornered and the 6 gather around to land a killing blow. However, Dr. Octopus and Scorpion end up in a fight over who gets to kill Spider-Man. This buys him the time to escape, even though he takes quite a beating. To make matters worse, his spider powers are gone at this crucial moment, and it is by sheer luck that he gets away with his life. He heads straight to Dr. Connors to find out why his powers are malfunctioning, and Kingpin sends his 6 powerful soldiers to look for him across the city. Scorpion plans to follow Peter Parker because he is the one who takes all the photos of Spider-Man. Scorpion believes that Peter can lead him to the superhero, and Dr. Octopus is also there to offer him some support. Aunt May is kidnapped, and Peter is forced to attempt a rescue even without his powers. He is on the verge of getting killed according to Kingpin's plans, but the next episode, called Battle of the Insidious Six, reveals that Spider-Man is captured. Dr. Octopus finds out that the man behind the mask is actually Peter Parker, and he is shocked. But they all believe that Peter is only posing as Spider-Man to save his aunt. Meanwhile, Silvermane, who was earlier promised that Spider-Man would be captured and killed, now orders Kingpin to be removed by the cartel. Kingpin uses the group of Insidious Six to attack the cartel instead. One of Shocker's blasts helps Spider-Man regain his powers, and ultimately, the supervillain team falls apart when they refuse to continue working for Kingpin. But I still think that the story captures his true personality, where he can lead those who are more powerful than him on paper. Also, his appearances in Spider-Man the Animated Series prove that he could be a part of a long-running story across seasons instead of one-off cameos. The Trial of the Incredible Hulk, 1989, and Daredevil, 2003, the live-action prologue. These are a couple of live-action appearances of Kingpin that predate the glorious D'Onofrio era, and while they are not the greatest works of art, they are still fun to watch. However, you have to keep it in mind that these films did not have the budget or the scope to do justice to the character. In The Trial of the Incredible Hulk, which is a TV movie, Bruce Banner is on the run, and he reaches the city that is under the control of Wilson Fisk. When his cover is blown, Matt Murdock fights his case pro bono, but Fisk gets in the way of eliminating witnesses. The story is not entirely focused on Kingpin, but toward the end you can see Fisk holding a meeting with the crime bosses as he proposes consolidating their operations into a nationwide syndicate with him as the chairman. Unfortunately for him, at this meeting he claimed to have killed Daredevil, but the latter breaks in and the crime bosses are forced to flee. John Rhys Davies plays the role of Wilson Fisk in the movie, and while it is no means a perfect choice, I really enjoyed the performance. In Daredevil 2003, Michael Clark Duncan slips into the character, and he was physically imposing and brought in the intimidating factor into Kingpin's on-screen persona. In this film, Kingpin mostly works behind the scenes and hires Bullseye to kill Daredevil. What I find problematic with the narrative is how Kingpin takes the back seat, and Bullseye seems like the more active villain. The director's cut has some extra footage for Fisk, and his rivalry with Matt Murdock is explained better through a case where Murdock defends a drug dealer. Like I said before, neither are great adaptations, and the only significance of these live-action appearances is that they showed the way and made the future adaptations possible. Netflix's Daredevil, 2015 to 2018, the definitive OG version. I think most of the fans will agree that nobody is better suited than D'Onofrio to play the role of Kingpin, and he shines as Wilson Fisk in the Netflix series. Many have dubbed this as one of the best portrayals of the iconic mob boss, and the sheer complexity of his personality captured in the show is fascinating. In the Netflix Daredevil series, Wilson Fisk is introduced in Season 1 as a quiet, highly intelligent, and deeply conflicted businessman, hiding behind a thin veil of respectability, while secretly orchestrating the criminal underworld of Hell's Kitchen. Born and raised in the same neighborhood he now seeks to rebuild, Fisk is haunted by memories of childhood abuse at the hands of his father. Perhaps one of the most impactful episodes is the one titled Shadows in the Glass, which reveals some of his childhood trauma. He grew up with an abusive father, and his effort to protect his mother eventually forced him to kill his father with a hammer. I don't remember a more disturbing scene in Marvel television history, and and I love how the narrative frames it almost sympathetically. Since then, he developed a fierce and obsessive belief that strength and control are the only answers to chaos. This trauma shapes his worldview and fuels his desire to remake Hell's Kitchen into a shiny, orderly metropolis under his own benevolent thumb. As Daredevil begins targeting the low-level gangs and enforcers that feed into Fisk's empire, you know what really makes it deep though? Fisk's arc in Season 1 is as much about intimacy and intimacy fear as it is about power. His relationship with art dealer Vanessa Mariana adds a rare softness to his personality because he genuinely tries to protect her from the violence of his world, demanding later that she never ask about his business and promising her safety and a better life. As he rises in public prominence by securing a high-profile deal with the real estate firm Union Allied and positioning himself as a savable philanthropist, his private life becomes increasingly volatile. When Wesley is killed by Karen Page, he cannot come to terms with the tragedy, and it devastated him emotionally. When Vanessa discovers the truth about his criminal life, she is horrified and attempts to leave, but Fisk emotionally manipulates and ultimately wins her back, convincing her that this version of order is a nobler idea than lawlessness. By the end of Season 1, Fisk's duality is complete, because he appears as a legitimate businessman and civic leader, even threatening journalists and twisting the narrative of the Hell's Kitchen chaos to his advantage, while behind the scenes he orders the destruction of rival gangs and the brutal elimination of anyone who stands in his way. In Season 2, Kingpin's role shifts to a darker, more strategic shadow figure, overseeing the broader criminal landscape. Having survived the police raid at the climax of Season 1, Fisk is imprisoned but still exerts enormous influence from inside prison, using his connections and wealth to manipulate the city's underworld. From behind bars, he orchestrates a power struggle among the remaining gangs, which feed into his larger goal of keeping Hell's Kitchen destabilized so that he can re-enter the scene as a savior when he is released. Fisk also seeks to undermine Daredevil's reputation, knowing that the Vigilante is one of the only real threats to his control, and he uses lawyers, media, and even connections to the FBI to try to delegitimize the masked hero. Throughout Season 2, even without direct street presence, he remains a master of leverage. He knows who is vulnerable, who can be bribed, and who can be destroyed. His imprisonment becomes less a defeat and more a test of his ability to bend the system to his will, and he begins cultivating a new network of allies and proxies who can uphold his vision in his absence. At the same time, he is forced to confront his own emotional fragility, glimpsed in moments where he fixates on Vanessa's departure or fixates on the idea that love and power are incompatible. By the end of Season 2, Fisk remains incarcerated, but he is far from broken. His presence in the story is a constant reminder that the larger war for Hell's Kitchen is about a man who believes that only through absolute control, no matter how violent, can he erase the pain of his own past and create a city he can finally call safe. Across both seasons, Kingpin emerges as a tragic, almost Shakespearean villain, and I would say that he is easily the most psychologically complex antagonist in the Netflix Marvel universe. The MCU continuation, Hawkeye, Echo, and Daredevil, Born Again, 2021 through 2025. When people say that the reintroduction of Kingpin in Hawkeye is a work of art, I completely agree. I won't go into the details of the story here because it's not predominantly about Wilson Fisk, but he does make his presence felt in the final episodes. He doesn't have a lot of screen time, and the primary purpose to show him at all is to establish that he is alive and active. He has a complicated relationship with Maya, and by the end of the season, he is shot by her even though he survives. It grows further in the 2024 Disney Plus series Echo, where his relationship with Maya Lopez is further explored. Maya lost her mother in an accident back in 2007, and then she moved to New York City with her father William, who works for Wilson Fisk. After the death of William, Fisk arranges for Maya to work with him under the promise of finding his killer. But when she finds out that it was Fisk who arranged William's death, she gets her revenge by shooting him in the eye. As he recovers from his injuries, Maya plans to take over his empire, and you can already tell that the story will be worth investing your time in. What adds to the depth of the narrative is the flashback sequence that shows a genuine connection that Fisk felt for Maya, almost like a protective uncle. It is complicated without a doubt because even though the affection he feels for Maya is real, he also weaponizes and uses it to his advantage. Lastly, we have Daredevil Born Again, which is premised many years after the events of the earlier Daredevil series. The narrative takes takes you through how Matt Murdock continues to fight for justice as a lawyer, even though he has stopped acting out as a masked vigilante. Meanwhile, Fisk is elected mayor of New York City, which couldn't be any more ironical. This is the man who always believed himself to be a legitimate power, and now he is officially legitimate as a powerful political figure. Of course, it puts him against Murdock, even though he tries his best to impose martial law and targets vigilantes, including Daredevil himself. This being an ongoing series, I wouldn't ruin it with spoilers, but I will surely recommend this as an enriching experience. I would love to hear your take on Wilson Fisk and his intriguing storylines in the comments below, and feel free to speak up about your favorites. Also, if you appreciate the efforts to bring you this content, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more such videos.